This is for September 16th, American history. The French and Indian War is over. The English have accumulated a massive debt to pay off. The British decide it is up to the American colonists to pay off the debt that was incurred to protect the American colonists. The requirement to pay off the debt struck a sour note with the colonists. The colonists were not opposed to paying the money. They knew that the war had been fought to protect them from the French, and so they were willing to pay it. However, what they were afraid was they would get no say in what debts they would have to pay and what taxes would be incurred upon them. We're going to hear about a series of prime ministers who are going to be just absolutely disastrous in paying off the debt. Now, William Pitt is going to resign after the Treaty of Paris. This is pretty common amongst British politicians that once a great event is over, they resign, let somebody new take the responsibility. George Grenville, who was a member of Parliament, is given the task to raise money to pay off the war. Grenville will propose to Parliament, and Parliament will agree to the Sugar Act. Now, sugar is a commodity that is hard to find in those days. The Sugar Act is going to place a duty or a tax on things sweet like molasses. But it's also going to you're also going to have to pay a duty for things like coffee, indigo, wine, and other items. Now, not only do the colonists have to pay this, but everybody in the empire has to pay this. Colonists were opposed to the Sugar Act. They were opposed to the Sugar Act because they did not have a say in Parliament. The expression "no representation, no taxation without representation" could be heard throughout the colonies. Many of the colonies began to organize a boycott. Now, a boycott is where you refuse to purchase an item or you refuse to do business with a particular group. This boycott was particularly effective, and the British understood that they could not collect a tax, so they are going to move on to another tax, the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act is what is called an internal tax. Now, an internal tax is where only the people from the colonies pay it. The tax will be found on newspapers, playing cards, and legal documents. Now, trust me, two groups of people you don't want to get angry with you are lawyers and newspaper publishers. And lawyers began to protest, and newspaper publishers began to say how unfair the Stamp Act was. Now, this short video I cannot show you because I'm afraid YouTube would probably block it, so we shall move on. The colonists called for a Stamp Act Congress. Now, all in all, 9 colonies assembled to talk about a repeal of the act. They wrote a letter: "Dear Parliament, reject the Stamp Act." They sent the letter to Parliament. Parliament, of course, rejected it. So why is the Stamp Act Congress so important? Well, remember when the Native Americans and French were about ready to attack the American colonists? We couldn't even get 3 colonies to agree during the Albany Plan. Now we have 9 colonies who are agreeing to do something to stop the Stamp Act. Many of the colonists are going to form into gangs or groups called the Sons of Liberty. Now, the Sons of Liberty were men mostly who are going to protest British actions, but they're going to do it by going to the agents who are supposed to carry out the laws and threatening them and threatening their family. They're going to burn stores. They're going to throw rocks through the windows of the administrators' homes. They're going to do things that we would today call intimidation. Now, of course, we play up the Sons of Liberty because we believe that their cause was just. If you read British history does not have the same opinion of the Sons of Liberty compared to American history. One of the Sons of Liberty members was a House of Burgess member by the name of Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry had had enough of the British actions. Patrick Henry believed that we should declare our independence. In a memorable speech to the House of Burgess, Patrick Henry is going to stand up and proclaim to the members, "I know not what for you, gentlemen, but for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, are there enough Americans at this time who are ready to commit to rebellion that we would stand a ghost of a chance of winning? No. Only a very small but very vocal group have said this. Grenville will eventually resign as Prime Minister, and the Parliament will pick a new Prime Minister, Lord Rockingham. Now, Rockingham was convinced that the various acts under Grenville did not work, and so he repealed the Sugar Act, he repealed the Stamp Act, he repealed the Declaration Act. In its place, Rockingham is pledging that only Parliament can decide what the colonies should or should not do. Now, this, of course, goes to the very heart of the matter the colonists were upset about. The colonists wanted to have a say in the bills that were passed by Parliament. Again, no taxation without representation. I believe at this moment, if Parliament would have said to the colonists, okay, each colony can send one member to Parliament. Now, of course, the colonies would be horribly outnumbered in Parliament, but still this would have given the colonies a chance to say what they had to say. Rockingham is going to rock the boat even farther when he's going to declare that colonists are not full-fledged citizens of Britain, and as such, the Bill of Rights passed during the Glorious Revolution does not apply to them. Rockingham is going to propose that Charles Townshend be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is what we would call our Treasury Secretary today. Townshend is going to come up with the Townshend Act. Now, the Townshend Act is going to call for duties on anything that is imported into the colonies. Well, we've had this before. How is this act different? Townshend is going to say that a British tax collector has the writ of assistance. Now, a writ of assistance is a search warrant. For a British citizen to have somebody search his or her home, a judge would have to listen to what the people were looking for. The judge would then have to decide whether enough evidence was there before he would issue a writ. Here in the colonies, writs were given for any reason to anybody to search any homes to see if they could find imported duties where a tax had not paid. The Townshend Act is also going to allow for British troops to stay in the homes of colonists. What better way to spy on those who were suspected of being rebels than having 2 or 3 British soldiers stay in the home? Now, the women of the home would have to clean the British soldiers' clothing. They would have to provide the British soldiers with food and water. And of course, the British soldiers would constantly be spying on these alleged Sons of Liberty members. This was an egregious law. Today we have a constitutional amendment, the Third Amendment, that prohibits this except in time of war. The Massachusetts legislature is going to create a petition, and the petition is going to be sent to Parliament to get rid of these laws. Now, notice that most of the people who are opposed to the action of Parliament are found in New England or in the middle colonies. Very little is being said by the southern colonies, with the exception of Patrick Henry in his famous speech. One of the loudest voices for revolution was John Hancock. Now, John Hancock was an extremely wealthy Boston businessman. He owns a fleet of ships that goes up and down the coastline of the colonies doing trading. Now, Hancock had a nasty habit of not paying taxes on his cargo. And to stop Hancock from doing this, the British are going to seize the ship Liberty. This is one of the ships that John Hancock had in his fleet. And they're going to hold the Liberty until Hancock pays the tax. Now, because Hancock refused, the British governor is going to ask for more troops to come to Boston. Boston was becoming an armed encampment. You know, violence is about ready to occur. In the winter of 1770, a riot broke out. The riot was caused by colonists, probably Sons of Liberty members, attacking British troops who were protecting the customs house. The customs house will have windows broken out. The agents will call for more troops to protect it. A guard-on of British troops will arrive, and as the Americans try to bust in, they will fire on the Americans. Now, the Americans called it a massacre. The British called it a riot. Now, here is a short video about the Boston Massacre. Again, I will not show it so that I will not have this entire video blocked by YouTube. John Adams, who was a Boston lawyer, believed that all men deserved their rightful place in court. And Adams will be called upon to defend the soldiers on the charge of manslaughter. Now, Adams will put on a brilliant defense, and a group of Boston citizens will find the British soldiers not guilty. Adams himself was a member of the Sons of Liberty, but his goal of trying to keep the courtrooms safe was more important than that of freedom. Paul Revere. Paul Revere was a silversmith in Boston. Paul Revere witnessed the Boston Massacre, and Paul Revere is going to make this etching. Now, an etching is a piece of metal that can be dipped in ink, and it can be printed over and over and over again. The events of the Boston Massacre will be published in newspapers, and these newspapers will be spread throughout the 13 colonies. Now, the organization that spreads the newspapers is called the Committee for Correspondence. The Committee for Correspondence is going to take the views of those who want to rebel from England and spread it here and wide. The Committee for Correspondence is going to make sure that all 13 colonies hear what happened in Boston. The Townshend Acts were repealed because they were not raising enough money. Just when things were calming down, a British patrol boat called the Gaspee is going to run aground off the coast of Rhode Island. The British sailors on the Gaspee will row ashore to get a bigger boat to pull them off the sandbar, and when they return several hours later, they will find that the Gaspee has been burned to the waterline. Now, the Gaspee is His Majesty's ship, and this is ratcheting up the violence even more. The British are going to blame John Hancock. John Hancock and the Sons of Liberty members, although not taking credit for it, certainly did not say, "Oh no, we didn't." To prevent more violence, the British are going to send more troops into Boston. Now, one of the things that I would have written in my notes is more and more troops are being sent to Boston. If anything's going to happen, it's probably going to happen in Boston first. And I think this would be a good place for us to stop, because the videos would have taken us very close to the end of the period. Tomorrow we're going to finish up Lesson 5. At the end of Lesson 5, there's going to be a walkout worksheet. So if you are not with us on the 17th, make sure you answer the 5 questions at the bottom of the paper. so that you can get credit for those points. Otherwise, your score goes to missing, and missing implies 0 out of 5. Okay, thank you.